So I am pleased to welcome the Honourable Scott Moe, Premier of Saskatchewan. Scott Moe was first elected to the Saskatchewan legislature in the 2011 provincial election. He was re-elected in 2016. He was then elected leader of the Saskatchewan Party on January 27th, 2018, and sworn in as Premier on February 2nd, 2018. Premier Moe was born and raised in the constituency on a grain farm between Shellbrook and Parkside. He and his wife Krista live in Shellbrook with their 2 children. And as a family, they enjoy many outdoor activities in what he describes as the irreplaceable landscape of Saskatchewan. Premier Moe was educated at the University of Saskatchewan, where he received his Bachelor of Science degree in agriculture. He has been active in the community through his work with the Economic Development Corporation, the Shellbrook and District Health Services Project Incorporated, and the Shellbrook and District Physician Recruitment Committee. He has also volunteered his time to work with local hockey and softball associations. Premier Moe served as a member of the Legislature's Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies, and he was Deputy Chair of the Legislative Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Premier Moe has previously served as Minister of Environment, Minister of Advanced Education, Minister responsible for Saskatchewan Water Corporation, and Minister responsible for Saskatchewan Water Security Agents. Please join me in welcoming Premier Scott Moe.
Well, thank you very much, Ray, and thank you everyone for attending here today, and I hope you've had a great week at SARM. I had the opportunity to come over for a couple of hours last night and listen to the late, or not the late great, but the great, the great Dennis Hall. Now I'm already in trouble and I haven't even started. But welcome to the Reeves councillors, my legislative colleagues from the provincial legislature. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an MP here as well, probably a few of them. I haven't seen them, but welcome to everyone here this morning. Good morning, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's so great for me to be back here. One part of it is great to be here as Premier, but I think it's almost greater to be here not as the Minister of Environment in the province of Saskatchewan. I don't think I am going to get a question in the bear pit, and Dustin Duncan is in the back. He's stretching out, he's getting ready. I have him nervous. But delegates, more seriously, feel free to direct as many questions as you have to all of the members of Cabinet that we'll have here shortly, as I know firsthand as you do how well versed they are in their files and how capable they are in handling the questions that you have, providing the answers that you're looking for, and if we're not able to, we will follow up with you after for certain. You know, our former Premier, Premier Wall, he often said deciding his Cabinet selections was one of the most difficult and challenging actions that a Premier had to go through. And with such a strong and talented caucus, and I'll speak to a member or two of that caucus later, I can confirm that that is in fact the case for me thus far. And during this process, you remember a lot of things that happen over your own personal experiences. And I remember most specifically, as I was going through a Cabinet selection process, a comment, not a question, a comment that came from the floor at a previous SARM convention comparing environment ministers in the province of Saskatchewan and their shelf life to that of a jar of peanut butter. So when I chose this Cabinet, I was very aware of, if I was to change the Minister of Environment, that I would be called out on the floor of the SARM convention. Again, comparing our shelf life of our Minister of Environment to that of a jar of peanut butter. So I am pleased to announce here this morning, the largest announcement we have is our Minister of Environment, Dustin Duncan, remains as a Minister of Environment at the last Cabinet shuffle. And as I said, he's in the back getting ready for your questions. But this, as I said, this is the first time that I have appeared at SARM as your Premier. I've been on the job for about a little more than a month now, and so far so good. I know there are many people across the province that are still getting used to the fact that our province does have a new and somewhat different Premier. Some of those people happen to be members of my family, actually. I had a text shortly after the leadership convention from a brother-in-law of mine. He lives in southern Los Angeles, and the text went something like this. Scott, are you the Premier of Saskatchewan? WTF. So I had to ask my daughter, I said, what does WTF mean? And she told me. So I immediately thought, I wonder how many of my former high school teachers and some of my university professors are having exactly the same reaction across the province right now. And I wasn't sure whether my brother-in-law was actually pleased by the news or whether he was alarmed for the future of our province. But I will say he was certainly surprised, and it underscored for me that I need to make an effort to stay in a little closer touch with the members of my family. And I also underscored to him, I said, you need to stay in a little closer touch with the province that raised you. But friends, this morning, I do want to address a number of issues that are top of mind for many of you and many of us in our great province of Saskatchewan. But before I do, I want to take the opportunity to say thank you. Thank you to each and every one of you. No one is getting wealthy in your position as a municipal councillor across the province of Saskatchewan. And I'm proud to say, and I'm pleased to say, that we are so very fortunate in this province to have the strong, the effective leadership that we have in municipal government, in communities, in rural municipalities right across Saskatchewan. And I think it's fair to say that we're reminded of this. We are reminded of this each and every year. But we were reminded of this again last fall during some of the wildfires that we had on the west side of the province. And this was an anxious time for many of our communities, many reeves and councillors on the west side of Saskatchewan. And I would say that you responded like you always do in the case of emergencies. You responded with speed, with urgency, and you responded often without regard for your own personal safety. We are grateful for what you did in this crisis, and we are grateful for what you do each and every day in our communities in Saskatchewan. And to add to that, the next time that we do have an outbreak of wildfires in southern Saskatchewan, and we do from time to time, I'm pleased to say that we are going to be in a better position to at least attempt to contain them due to some of the efforts of Fred Bradshaw, the MLA for Carrot River. Now, many of you know Fred. Many of you may or may not know Fred is an experienced pilot. He says he's an experienced pilot. But for years, he did work as an aerial applicator. I call them crop dusters. Fred corrects me. That is not the correct terminology. It's an aerial applicator. But Fred, he has a friend in the United States who trains aerial applicators in fire suppression, a gentleman by the name of Chip Kemper. During the last few years, and I worked with Fred on this as Minister of Environment, and I know Dustin Duncan has brought it through, Chip has come up to Saskatchewan, and at Fred's request, he has trained 24 aerial applicators to fight grassland fires here in the province of Saskatchewan, and I'm pleased to say that those pilots are now in the process of being certified. There are still a few issues for us to work out, but they're minor, and they will be available in the coming months to help out with fires across this province. These are 24 aerial applicators that are already located and doing business in various communities and areas across the province of Saskatchewan, so they are already there. And I am pleased to say that the cost of making this service, in true Saskatchewan fashion, the cost of making this service available to the municipalities where you live and where I live was very minimal. But the potential benefit is quite massive. You see, Chip Kemper, he provided his services for free at Fred's request. Fred's a great negotiator. I think the deal was Fred had to buy him and the pilots a few dinners, so they went to Subway. So I think today, as we move forward with this initiative, which is a small initiative but has the potential to have a great benefit to all of us, we say very, very much a large thank you to Chip, and we say a very large thank you to Fred Bradshaw, our caucus colleague and MLA for Carrot River. Ladies and gentlemen, I also want to talk about something that has been front and center for many of your ratepayers and many of you in this room, many of the people that we represent across the province, and I can assure you that it's front and center for your provincial government, and that's the state of Canada's grain transportation system. A few days ago in the Globe and Mail, there was a column with the headline, and I quote, "Underinvestment in critical rail and pipeline infrastructure could cost Canada billions," end quote. The column was written by Barry McKenna, and settle down, Dustin, he's absolutely no relation to Catherine McKenna. the federal environment minister. But he says this, Barry McKenna says this, he says, it might as well be 1913. It's mind-boggling that after 133 years, after the completion of the Transcontinental Railway, Canada still struggles to get vital exports of wheat, of canola, and of barley to our global customers, end quote. Delegates, this is absolutely mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling that this is happening again for the second time in 4 years. Our reputation, Saskatchewan's reputation and Canada's reputation as a reliable supplier of commodities, as a trustworthy business partner, is being damaged. Some of those producers that you represent, and I said we represent, this past year took off the third largest crop in the provincial history of Saskatchewan. And we are now, many of them are struggling to pay their bills because their grain just simply isn't moving. We have communicated your unhappiness, this province's unhappiness, and to the federal government as recently as this past Friday when I met with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. We've communicated it directly and we've communicated it bluntly. As I said, I've talked to Prime Minister Trudeau as recently as this past Friday. I've talked to him 3 times and I've raised this with him. We're in a situation where the Fair Rail for Grain Farmers Act has lapsed, as many of you know, and Bill C-49 has not yet come into force. So there's this vacuum that we have in our transportation system. I urge the Prime Minister to step in if need be and fill that vacuum with an order in council mandating volume-based deliveries and mandating interswitching abilities. This would allow any rail company, including our short lines, to come in and move grain if another railway is not getting the job done. I know that Minister Merritt and Minister Stewart have made the same comments and had the same conversations with their federal counterparts, and I thank them for that. To date, there has been no action from the federal government other than asking the railways for their plans to deal with the situation. I've seen a couple of those plans as recent as early this morning, and I would say that it's somewhat underwhelming so far. There is much in the way of being apologetic, and they should be, because they have to answer for the lack of product that has moved. CP is adding locomotives this summer. CN's interim CEO, JJ Ruiz, whom I talked to last week, says the company is hiring more conductors, it's leasing more locomotives, and it's building more track and yard capacity. Mr. Ruiz also said in a news release that Canadians can count on CN to get the job done. Well, unfortunately, we've been here before, and I'm not positive that we can. So we're wondering, and we're asking the federal government to hold them to account. Delegates in this room and across the province, we need a long-term solution to this problem that we have experienced twice, as I said, in the last 4 years. We cannot be reliving this often. It's too damaging to our economy. It's like reliving Groundhog Day each and every year. We need a solution that includes tougher reciprocal penalties for the railways and for the shippers when they cause bottlenecks in this all too important system. We need clearly stipulated levels of service for all of those involved. We need long-haul interswitching capacity that is easily and quickly accessible for our shippers. We need new reporting requirements for the railways so that we can track their performance and correct it long before it ever becomes an issue. And let's be absolutely clear about this. This is the federal government's responsibility. Our national transportation system is the federal responsibility, and it is Ottawa and our federal government that needs to show leadership on this file. Our grain transportation, as well as on our pipelines, because they are interconnected from Saskatchewan's perspective and from Canada's perspective. With more oil moving by rail, grain becomes less of a priority for our railways. Ladies and gentlemen, in Saskatchewan, we live and die by exports, and we live and die by the trade that we conduct with over 150 countries all around the world. More than 100,000 jobs in our province are directly dependent on our ability to get those goods to market. And that number is only going to grow because we are only going to grow our exports into the future. We produce precisely what the world is looking for in food and fuel and fertilizer. And we produce these products competitively, we produce these products reliably, responsibly, and most importantly, as we go forward, we produce all of these products sustainably. And there is enormous potential for us to do more business. And we need the federal government to live up to its responsibilities with respect to capacity on our rails and our pipelines and our ports. We need that potential so that we can realize our potential. And we need action on the grain transportation file. Where we don't need action is in the area of a federally imposed carbon tax in the province of Saskatchewan. Thanks. Earlier this week, Minister McKenna once again threatened to impose a carbon tax on Saskatchewan if we don't run out and impose one on ourselves. Well, it should be no surprise that that isn't going to happen. The other provinces have signed on to the Pan-Canadian Climate Plan. We have not, and we will not. Not as long as a carbon tax lies at the heart of that document, and it does. Delegates, our government acknowledges that climate change is happening and that humans are contributing to this. We accept this. We accept that. But a carbon tax is not a solution. There is no jurisdiction in the world that has imposed a carbon tax and has seen a corresponding reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. It just simply doesn't work. A $50 per ton carbon tax would cost the province of Saskatchewan $4 billion over the next 5 years, and those costs would come out of agriculture, they would come out of our energy industry, and they would come out of our mining industry, and they would come out of the pockets of families across this province. We believe there's a better way. We believe there is a much better approach to this conversation, a more fulsome carbon conversation. Our government has released under Minister Duncan a Made in Saskatchewan climate change strategy called Prairie Resilience. It's a plan that recognizes the reality of our province and will result in actual emissions reductions in the province of Saskatchewan. For example, SaskPower is in the midst of expanding our renewable power generation capacity to 50% by the year 2030. At Boundary Dam 3, we just announced the other day that we have sequestered 2 million tons of carbon dioxide, utilized most of that in enhanced oil recovery. That's the equivalent of taking 500,000 vehicles off the road each and every year. When you compare this to a coal-fired power generator that is being built as we speak in Vietnam, a complex of coal-fired generators capable of producing 4,300 megawatts of power, all new power, all coal power. Consequently, about the size of SaskPower's full generating capacity here in the province of Saskatchewan. When you look at the potential of technology and innovation and knowledge like carbon capture and storage, and you take that potential outside of the borders of Saskatchewan to a place like Vietnam, and you look at the potential that carbon capture and storage has in addressing climate change, in addressing carbon emissions, not just within the borders of Saskatchewan, but far outside the borders of Saskatchewan, and addressing climate change, which is a global challenge, on what is a much more, addressing that climate change on a global basis. This is the opportunity, this is what Saskatchewan can bring to the conversation of climate change, is what we are doing in the ways of carbon capture and storage, what we are doing in agriculture, and bringing that to the world. We should be aware that the carbon intensity of agriculture, due to research and due to innovation and due to agronomics and due to fertility, but the carbon intensity in agriculture has been dropping in part because of the research undertaken at the University of Saskatchewan that has been invested in by the people in this room and the people across this province in just that, those genetics, in just that agronomy, most specifically in zero-till technology. We manufacture and export air drills now out of this province from companies like Bourgault Industries in St. Brou, like Morris Industries in Yorkton, like Seedmaster at Emerald Park. These air drills and these companies manufacture are helping now reduce emissions not just within the borders of Saskatchewan, but as we export them to places like Russia, to Kazakhstan, to Australia, and to the United States, we are now, with technology right from the province of Saskatchewan, again approaching climate change outside our borders on a much more global scale and to much greater effect. In fact, zero-till in our province, combined with the increase in pulse crops that came from the Crop Development Center that were again invested in by the people in this room and the people across the province of Saskatchewan, have helped turn Saskatchewan soils into an enormous carbon sink. Our crop agriculture soils are now fixing carbon each and every day throughout the summer. And let's not forget about animal agriculture and the 17 million acres of grassland that we have that has provincial easement protections on it across the province of Saskatchewan that is now in itself sequestering 2.5 times the total emissions of the province of Saskatchewan each and every year. Agriculture is most certainly part of the solution as we move forward in innovation and what we're doing here in the province of Saskatchewan. It's of vital importance to our province, and it's of vital importance to our nation, and it's a comprehensive and realistic part of our climate change plan when we are advancing the interests of Saskatchewan people to Canada and to the world. What is not realistic, ladies and gentlemen, is a climate change plan in this province that has a carbon tax attached to it, and it won't be. Delegates, there are a few other topics that I want to address before I finish up, and the first is landfills, in case there may be a question in the bear pit. We have a number of them across the province, which would be no surprise to this room. In fact, on a per capita basis, which I do not like those statistics, but we do have the largest per capita number of landfills in the nation, which means nothing to me. Over the last year, the Ministry of Environment has been consulting on waste management and waste reduction in the province of Saskatchewan. I started some of that consultation. Minister Duncan is continuing with it. And much of the work has been guided by an advisory committee, of which there are members in this room, and SARM, as well as SUMA, that are part of that committee. And we certainly appreciate your participation in that effort. The input from that committee is reflected in the draft strategy that is currently being finalized, and it will be available for further comment later this spring. During the leadership campaign, many of you may have heard me talk about landfills and waste management policies in the province of Saskatchewan, as I committed to a thorough review of both. And today I'm pleased to announce that I was kidding. No. I am pleased to announce that building on the good work already completed, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble up here, aren't I? We'll strengthen and formalize the solid waste advisory committee. We'll bring in some private operators to join the municipal representatives that are already on that committee, and we will strengthen that committee. And we will ask that committee to review the draft strategy that I said would be coming out this spring. They'll lead consultations with municipalities and other stakeholders, private and public, across the province, and to provide some final recommendations to the government and to the cabinet. And here's what is different from where we were. Those recommendations may include not only regulatory changes, but they will also include the possibility of changes to an act that was first brought in 1986 in the way of legislative changes. That, ladies and gentlemen, is new. Part of this discussion will take into account affordability, to ensure that we can afford safe landfills in our communities. We'll ask this committee to work with the Environmental Code Advisory Committee to see if there's potential for a code chapter on landfills, with a target outcome of safe landfills rather than tedious prescription-based process, which many of you are used to. And we'll work with this committee to look at other opportunities. For example, opportunities in the way of incineration. That I know there's a pilot project in southwestern Saskatchewan that people in this room are involved in. And while this review is taking place, we will put on hold enforcement action on existing landfills, except in those circumstances where public health is at risk. The priority, ladies and gentlemen, is safety, and the priority is affordability, and we will work together to ensure that we can get there. Moving forward, we would all do well, I would say, to consider making waste management more of a priority when it comes to looking at our infrastructure funding envelopes. There have been a number of cost-shared water and wastewater projects over the last number of years in municipalities across this province, and that's a great thing and it's an important thing. But it is also time for us to take into account and focus on solid waste management. We know there's a need for an investment. We will find a process and we will work with municipalities across the province. Delegates, recently there has been another discussion in our province, a spirited discussion about public safety in our communities and in our rural areas. We've had the most recent Stanley trial and we've had the verdict. There's a general concern about crime in many areas of the province, but most notably talked about in many rural areas of the province. And I believe that all Saskatchewan citizens, no matter where they live, they need to feel safe in their homes and in their communities across the province. So what we have done in government to make sure, what have we done in government to add to the safety of our communities and of our people? Well, last August, I know it's been mentioned, Herb Cox, the MLA for the Battlefords, released recommendations on our rural crime reduction plan, and one of the key recommendations was the creation of the Provincial Enforcement Team, which is composed of 258 armed officers in the province of Saskatchewan. 120 of those are RCMP. 30 of those positions are new positions in the RCMP. New RCMP are being added as we speak. We expect all of those officers to be fully deployed by later this spring. Finally, we think there is value in exploring with you and with communities across the province the potential of regional policing models to enhance public safety for all of us. This is a discussion that we need to continue in the weeks and in the months ahead, and it's a discussion where we acknowledge we have much more to do. Folks, in the next few weeks, Donna Harpower, our Minister of Finance, and our government will be releasing the provincial budget. Did I call you out there, Donna? Donna says it will be a challenging budget. It will be a challenging budget, ladies and gentlemen, but I will say this. We are on track to balance our books within our plan of 3 years, and that's one of the reasons that we should be optimistic about the future, is that we will continue to make every effort to preserve our ability to invest in our communities across this province in the same fashion that we have over the last 10 years. We need to preserve that ability, that financial sustainability into the future, not just for this year and next year, but for that next generation and our children's children. And in order to do that, we need a solid fiscal framework and a solid fiscal health, and our 3-year plan to balance will provide that for us. There are other reasons for us to be encouraged as we move forward. Indicators like the RBC forecast this past week, which predicts Saskatchewan will lead the country in economic growth this year. We need to discuss this. We need to discuss a number of things. Not just with our federal government, but with, more importantly, even our customers in the 150 countries that we export our products to all around the world. We need to discuss the fact of our products being reliably placed. We need to discuss the fact of the products that we have, the agricultural products, the manufactured goods, the energy goods, the mine goods, are competitively priced. We need to discuss with our customers all around the world the fact that those same products are produced in Saskatchewan sustainably, and when you need more of those products, you should look to Saskatchewan to buy them because they're reliable, they're competitive, and they're sustainable. We need to discuss the fact that we have a steel manufacturer here north of the city in Evraz Steel that has an 80% lower emission profile than the industry standard. We need to discuss the fact that if you tax that industry, it will move to other areas of the world, likely US or China, and emit 5 to 6 times the emissions into our atmosphere, and discuss whether that is good in our effort to fight what is a global issue in climate change. And we also need to discuss the fact that we would lose 1,000 jobs as that plant moved to somewhere else in the world. We need to discuss the opportunity that we have in carbon capture and storage with 1,600 coal-fired generators coming on stream, planned or being built around the world, and the opportunities that Saskatchewan innovation can bring to the world. We need to discuss the sustainability of our energy products here in Saskatchewan when you compare them to energy products from Saudi Arabia and Algeria and Venezuela. We need to discuss the full environmental suite that our potash mines environmental suite of regulations that our potash mines operate under here in the province of Saskatchewan when you compare them to potash mines, competitors of theirs in Russia and Belarus. We need to discuss the fact that crop agriculture in the province of Saskatchewan, due to innovation by people in this room invested in or directly, is a great carbon sink for the world. We need to discuss our forests. We need to discuss the fact that our grasslands in the province of Saskatchewan are offsetting 2.5 tons of our emissions here in the province, in this province. And the reason we need to discuss that is because young people, the next generation, are looking for an opportunity here. They're building their lives here, and they're looking to pursue the very dreams that we have here in the province of Saskatchewan. Young people are choosing our province for the first time in decades. Ladies and gentlemen, those young people are coming here and they're ready to do their part. Let's all resolve to do ours. Let's make sure that this province remains worthy of the visions and the ambitions of the next generation and the generation after that. Let's do everything we can together to ensure that we keep this great province of Saskatchewan strong into the future. thank you for coming, and we look forward to the next interaction here. Can we bring the cabinet ministers up? I maybe have a quick story before we get going. Yeah, go ahead. So we'll have everybody come up here. Dustin Duncan, I was joking a little bit. I think you're off the hook here today, as we've had a tremendous lobby amongst colleagues and cabinet ministers here, as this is the first time that Dave Merritt has not been at this microphone, and he'll be at one of these down here. And I would encourage the room to be very seriously be thinking about your questions that could be directed at Dave Merritt, and if he isn't getting enough, for the first time, I'm at this microphone, and I'll ensure that he does. So the Health Minister, the Minister of Environment, the Minister of Rural and Remote Health, Justice, Social Services have all asked that a few of their first questions are directed at Dave Merritt.
Hi there.
Oh, and education as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Premier Moe. I'd like, on behalf of SARM this morning, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to the Saskatchewan Cabinet Ministers here today and to thank them for attending this year's convention. We really appreciate this venue and really appreciate you, all of you, taking the time out this morning. So before we begin, there are a few guidelines for delegates to keep in mind. We ask you that you keep your questions and answers short and concise so that everyone has an opportunity to participate this morning. There is a 2-minute limit for the posing of questions. And when you begin speaking, a timer will appear on the screens around the room. And when it turns amber, that means you're getting close to your 2-minute time limit. And when it turns red, your time is up. Cabinet ministers have 3 minutes to provide their answers, as these seem to take a little bit longer to answer questions, so that's understandable. And they'll also be timed. I now ask Premier Scott Moe to come forward and introduce the provincial cabinet ministers.
All right, we'll start at the end here. We have at the end Ken Cheveldayoff, the Minister of Central Services. We have Greg Ottenbright, the Minister of Rural and Remote Health. This is a test for me. Minister of Health, Dr. Jim Ryder.
Well, now we've lost credibility.
Warren Kading, our Minister of Government Relations and First Nations and Métis Affairs. You guys can do it yourself. You have a microphone there. Donna Harpower, the Minister of Finance. The Mean Green Jean Mikowski, the Honourable Mean Green Jean Mikowski, the Minister of Parks, Culture and Sport. Our Minister of Social Services is Paul Merriman. Tina Beaudry-Miller is our Minister of Advanced Education and Innovation. Gordon Wyant is the Deputy Premier and Minister of Education. We have the busy guy of the day, Dustin Duncan, the Minister of Water Security Agency, Minister of Environment, Minister of Sask Power. All around good guy. Minister of Justice is Don Morgan. Minister of Policing and Corrections is Chris Tell. Honorable Bronwyn Eyre, our Minister of Energy Resources, Sask Energy and Sask Water Corporation. Minister of Crown Investment Corporations is Joe Hargrave from the great community of Prince Albert. Minister Lyle Stewart is also a steer rider. Is our Minister of Agriculture. Minister Jeremy Harrison is our Minister of Export and Trade. And last but certainly not least, and no stranger to this room, is David Merritt, our Minister of Highways and Infrastructure.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Premier. So with that, we'll open up questions to the microphones, and I see someone over at mic number 4. Go ahead, sir.
My question is for Premier Moe. My name is Tom McKnight from the Arm of Paddockwood. Start with, I'd say congratulations to you. I understand you had a meeting with our Prime Minister and that he was here in Regina. I'm sure that was a very intelligent and intellectual conversation. That said, I never got to see him when he was in Regina and never seen him on the news, so I don't know about everybody else, but I'm curious, what does he wear when he comes to Saskatchewan?
I don't remember. I maybe would make just a couple of comments with respect to that. I met with Prime Minister most recently last Monday. Minister Eyre was out at Evraz with him as well on, just yesterday, day before, a couple days ago, and here in the province. And he is our Prime Minister, and we need to work with our federal government wherever we have the opportunity. At times we'll agree to disagree, and we do, on carbon taxation and the impacts that would have to the industries here in the province of Saskatchewan, and we have all sorts of innovation and opportunities to add to that conversation, as I mentioned just a few here today. I will be very honest with you. At the end of the day, if we are not able to come to some sort of an agreement with respect to that, we will end up in court on that, and we like our chances when we get there. But I also brought up with our Prime Minister on that day the challenges we're having with transportation in general. First of all, pipelines, and the fact that we should build the pipelines that are approved, as well as some more. But also tied to that is the challenges that we're feeling in this room with our agricultural exports, with the rail challenges we have, but we are also feeling it with our potash. We're also feeling it with our energy, as we do transport some energy out by rail as well. And also I talked about our port capacity. As we need trade, and I did talk about trade agreements as well as NAFTA, and I offered my services there. But we need trade agreements, but we also need the ability to get that product to port. And that includes not only our rail capacity and our pipeline capacity, but it includes our access and the capacity that we have at the actual ports, as all of these members of our transportation delivery system, if you will, have to be working in unison in order for us to grow the economy and grow the jobs and grow our communities in this province like we intend to over the next decade and like we have over the last decade.
Mike Chu, go ahead.
Mark Gerard, RM of Moose Jaw, councillor. I want to start off by first complimenting our governments over the years, and especially probably the RCMP and the job that they do for us in regards to the way we've been conditioned to believe in the last 40 years that they have to continue to do more with less. That's a known conditioning. We all have felt it throughout our years here, and they do as much as they can with what they have. Now, what I would like to do is point out, or actually ask a question of our Justice Minister and our Public Safety Minister, Ministers Tell and Morgan, and even if the Premier wants to weigh in on this. When you take a look at the cost of policing and you do some very preliminary comparisons, the cost of policing in the city of Regina, it's a city of, as of 2016 census, was 239,000 people. So your cost per capita, based on a $75.5 million budget for RPS's service, comes out to about $315 per capita. You take a look at the city of Moose Jaw, quite a bit smaller, population of 33,000 and some, and a budget of approximately $10 million in 2017. Cost per capita policing, I believe it was $295 per capita. You take a look at the formulas, which are found in the Police Act regulations for calculating what is known as contract policing by the RCMP.
You'll have to ask your question because you're going to run out of
Okay,
time.
I'm sorry, I'm rambling here. Cost per capita of policing in rural Saskatchewan is down to $39.55 per capita. I think we can do better. We can probably come up with at least the extra 55 cents to make it 40 bucks. But cities are paying considerably more for their policing than what we are. So why are we expecting more out of the RCMP and other police services in the rural when we're not actually paying for it?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Oh, you're not on there, Don.
Thank you very much for the question. It's difficult to look at and assess the cost of policing or how policing should be based strictly on a per capita basis. we have different issues where in a city there's economies of scale because people live close together. In rural areas, they're spread more remotely, and it's a different type of challenges for the police officers that work there. So we need to look at and decide how best we can serve the needs of the province and how we can do it in the most effective way that we possibly can. The Premier mentioned earlier the protection and response team. Within that, there are 60 police positions that are currently deployed by the Combined Traffic Services Initiative. Those will have interoperable radios with the other policing services. We are adding 30 new police positions to be funded through SGI. We've repurposed 30 police positions currently funded by the Ministry of Justice. We also have got 40 Ministry of Highways commercial vehicle enforcement officers and 98 Ministry of Environment conservation officers. We want all of those people to be trained and to be accessible so that they can provide some immediate support for the citizens as situations arise, so they're not waiting for 30, 60, or 90 minutes for a response to be made. The Premier also mentioned that we may need to look at regional policing model, and those are discussions that we want to have. So right now we're focusing on service delivery, safety of the people, because I think we all appreciate the need for the safety that the citizens need to feel. They need to feel safe and secure in their homes. So we'll want to have further discussions as we go forward, but our immediate response is to increase the number of officers at the province's expense, try and ensure that the other people that are in the area that are peace officers, that those people are properly trained, are armed, and can provide some additional support. So we'll continue to go along that direction, but we know there's more work to do.
Chris, do you have just a quick number or the ratio? Because some of the RCMP costs are paid by the municipalities in rural Saskatchewan, and then a large number of it is also paid for by the provincial government, if I'm not mistaken.
I do. So if we have in our 17-18 provincial budget for provincial police, the RCMP, 169.9 million is to support RCMP under our provincial services agreement. Approximately 87.5 million is to provide policing to rural municipalities, RMs, and small urban municipalities. I think, you know, it's not as though I'm wanting to say, well, you know, the government of Saskatchewan just picks up the majority of the costs and nobody else should be concerned about this. We are all concerned about what's going on in rural Saskatchewan, in fact, all of Saskatchewan. The Ministry of Justice pays for the majority of policing in rural Saskatchewan. We do invoice the municipalities within the rural jurisdictions for a portion of the costs of policing, bearing in mind that the majority of the costs associated to RCMP policing in the province is borne by your government.
Okay. Thank you. Microphone number 3.
This applies, Tom Whalen, RM157. This applies to the Ministry of Government Relations Statements of Provincial Interest Planning Handbook, representing a heritage interest under the Ministry of Parks, Culture and Sport. Ministers, RRM updated our zoning bylaw and OCP in March of 2017, and one of the results of this was having a ratepayer who applied for a simple development permit having his application being forwarded to the Heritage Branch for their review of heritage sensitivity on his property. A land use concept map that exists covering most of the province flagged this particular property as a heritage sensitive property. This parcel is flagged not because it has been confirmed there is a heritage resource on it, simply because of the possibility there might be. The Director of Heritage Conservation Branch has said to me that this is just a tool for RMs to use when doing development planning. We, however, don't see it that way, as we feel no government department had any right to impose that private land would have to undergo excuse me, such screening when a subdivision or development is being proposed. While we understand the need to protect heritage resources, The process should not be to blanket vast amounts of private land because of criteria the Heritage Branch decided on its own, which includes a 3-kilometer radius where a previously discovered artifact has been found or having undisturbed bush on the land. At present, such land within these criteria may have to undergo an on-site pedestrian survey by a qualified archaeologist. If the developer wants to proceed with their project, the developer would be required to hire this archaeologist.
Excuse me, you're going to have to ask your question. I'm going to run out of time as well. If you have a question.
Yeah. Is the intent of the provincial government to support and promote development and municipalities implementing proper planning, or to impede the process by enacting such timely and costly processes that delay and prevents development and prevents RMs from wanting to undertake planning? We ask that you, ministers, remove this unfair and very costly procedure from private land here in the province. Thank you.
Okay, with respect to that, I think Minister Kading and then maybe Minister Makowski will have a couple of comments on that. Probably not to the specific case, but they'll speak to it in general terms with respect to the development of property here in the province of Saskatchewan and doing business at the speed of business, if you will.
So I'm slightly familiar with the case there. I do understand that the public consultation part is a key component when we get into the Planning and Development Act, and that is certainly a component that we need to be able to get a lot more input from our public and our stakeholders in the region. So that is certainly a component that we're going to be ensuring that is expanded on and is enforced more in the future. And certainly as we're moving for the development of the province, we have to take a lot of these factors into account, because now we're getting into sensitive areas that we never did anticipate that we'd be planning and developing around before. So that's certainly something that we always have to take into account as we're moving forward in our advancement of the province.
Okay, at the onset, I actually made a statement about trying to keep your questions short, and I appreciate if you can keep your presentation. We don't need a long presentation, because the more people that have shorter questions, the more questions we're going to get put forward, which I think would be what we want to do here today. So I'll go to microphone number 1.
Thank you. I'm Bev Kenny. I'm the Reeve of RM 155 at Wolseley, and I've been up here before talking about our hospital in our area. Back when Dustin was looking after this a few years back, we had a problem with our hospital being closed to acute care for a year. This summer, in August, we lost our doctor also. So it has been, I have to look at the term, for now we're an alternate level of care clients. So this means no acute care. And so we're going to need a doctor, and the SIPA program was supposed to provide one by the end of the year, 2017. That didn't happen. Now it's rolling out. I met with Jim and Stephen back about February last year and discussed some of these things going forward to be a little more proactive on it, and it hasn't happened. So I would like to know where our hospital's at, so I'd like to direct that who would ever look after that. My next thing is for government relations.
Sorry, one question, please.
One question? Okay, we'll go with the hospital.
Okay, thank you.
Jim and Greg, do you want to, if you're familiar with the specific town of Wolseley, as well as maybe just a little broader overview, as well as this is a topic I think that had multiple questions likely a number of years ago at the microphones with respect to access to medical healthcare professionals in our communities, rural communities across the province. That is getting better, but we still have some work to do. So if you two want to speak to this specifically and then broader.
Okay, yeah, rural recruitment and retention of professionals, doctors, and some of the other supportive professionals have been quite a challenge in the province over the years, and I'm honestly quite proud of where we've come. We do know there's a lot more work to do, but when we developed the SaskDocs recruitment model, when we started implementing our own Made in Saskatchewan International Physician Assessment Program, the SIPA program, it's really helped a lot. We've had a lot of success through our grads at the University of Saskatchewan as well. If you remember back a number of years ago, we had about a 57% retention rate of our University of Saskatchewan grads, and we only had 60 seats. Now we have 100 seats, and 75% of those are staying in the province. The good news is a lot of those are now looking at some of our rural locations as a good career choice. So things are getting better with our own grads, and that's why with our SIPA program, an international doctor program, we're able to pull the numbers of those intakes down because the need is a little bit less. With respect specifically to Wolseley, we only found out in February that that SIPA graduate wasn't going to make it through the program. We have another one on track to be available this summer. And as soon as we have them in place, then we can instate the acute care services.
Jim agrees.
Okay, thank you for the question. Microphone number 4.
Hi, my name's Shelley Quist. I'm a combined lab and X-ray technologist from the community of Wynyard. Just to give a bit of a background, I've been working in rural hospitals for the past 15 years, and I have seen a decline in morale. I've seen a decline in our staffing. Currently, right now in Wynyard, we have the numbers to support having 3 full-time staff, and we only have 2 full-time staff and a part-time staff. We're burning out because of the fact that we work all day, and then in the evenings, we're on call. This past Sunday, I was called in 5 times. That's supposed to be my day off, and that doesn't happen. I'd like to know also about recruitment and retention of technologists, where we're sitting with that, and what priority that's being taken, considering that we're trying to recruit into a really small position, but no one really wants to come out to rural Saskatchewan for a .17 position, maybe 1 day a week. My other topic is about the subpar technology in rural hospitals. Currently,
I'm sorry, but you're asking a bunch of questions. Could it be combined into one question for the health minister?
It can be.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
With the subpar technology in rural hospitals, currently we are working with film, which is supposed to be switched over, but we keep being told that it's being backed up. Now we're being told middle of May. And I really think that there needs to be investment in the province in radiology and also in the laboratory information system. So I would like to ask the ministers, where is the money, and please send it soon. Thanks.
I'll start off on that, and then if Greg wants to add anything, and he can. Just generally speaking, first of all, I'm troubled by what you said about morale. Certainly we're working very hard to improve that as we amalgamated the health regions and we're working as one entity. We think that's going to be helpful because we're going to standardize practices and what we're doing and the services we provide across the province. To your point about the .7 position, that is a problem. Greg and I have discussed this many times with our ministry officials, is that we constantly struggle to find that balance between providing an appropriate level of service for the number of people that are using the service, and yet if you start getting down into part-time work, often it's hard to recruit. I don't know the specifics about Wynyard, but if you'd like to stick around after the Bear Pit, I'd be happy to have a chat with you about that.
Yeah, if I could just add a little bit there, I think, as well. As I mentioned in my previous answer, we know recruitment and retention of professionals, not just physicians, but CLXTs is a bit of a challenge. What we find, a lot of the smaller communities, you have a CLXT that is from the community. Where we're getting challenges quite often, and maybe not specifically in this situation, but where they retire, and it's really hard to recruit somebody back in for a position that isn't a full-time position. So we're looking with the specific communities and trying to find ways that we can make those jobs more fulsome, maybe add some other duties if we're allowed, and maybe look for some not just with CLXTs, but when we look at rural medicine in general. I think this government's done a really good job at looking at alternative methods of care, specifically things like CECs or collaborative emergency centers, where you need emergency services in that community, but physician recruitment might be a challenge, or enough physician recruitment might be a challenge. So moving to a model where you have advanced care paramedic and nurses in place with doctor oversight, where we can still offer those services even in off hours. We're looking at a lot of different areas where we can utilize different expertise to start filling in some of those services in communities that would make healthcare a lot more accessible and not having people to travel. The technology is something we're very focused on. We've really moved a long ways in the province with remote presence technology, telehealth, and now nurse robots and health in your hands. When it comes to the action, and we're going to continue down that path because we know that is going to be a strategic thing to deliver healthcare throughout the province that is as populated and geographic area that we do have. With the radiology in specific, we know that the film is outdated. That can't continue on very long, so we're coming up with a specific plan that'll cover the province, across the province, where we can have the digital machines in place that can transfer those images for reading anywhere we need them to, and making sure that those sites that have that technology are doing an ample amount of scans so that we can make sure that the staff there is staying accredited and make sure those services are attainable within a very short driving distance in rural Saskatchewan.
I would just maybe follow up with a couple of broad comments after that. This is something, access to healthcare in rural communities is actually something that I worked on long before I was elected, as it was a challenge across this province. And I would just very quickly say that I think we have been provided good leadership over the last decade in Ministers McMorris, Ministers Duncan, Ministers Weeks, Minister McMillan for a short period of time, and now with Ministers Ryder and Ottenbright on this file. And I think it's important for us to recall how far we have came in this province in access to those medical health professionals, and it's came in many ways from the leadership and the communication from people in this room and the leadership of those present and previous ministers. And now that work continues with joining the health region into one. But it is important for us to recognize the 750 more physicians that we do have across the province, and the nurses, the over 3,000 nurses that we do have across the province. And there's more to do, but there has been the investment in infrastructure as well in both rural and urban communities. And we continue to work with you to ensure that we have access to the services that you, as people of the province, expect. But it's also incumbent on us to look back as we start to frame how we look as we look into the next decade.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Mike 2 and back to 3 and then 1. Mike 2, go ahead.
My name is Randy Rook. I'm a counselor for Division 344, RM McCormick Park. My question revolves around the 500 floodplain, 1 in 500 floodplain.
Please try and speak a little closer into the microphone.
It needs to be a little higher, but
yeah,
in any event, it has to the 1 in 500 floodplain level that is currently in the Statement of Provincial Interest. I understand the Statement of Provincial Interest is currently being reviewed this year. The difficulty we have is that the entire valley in my division is within the 1 in 500 floodplain level and has been designated by the Water Security Agency as a floodplain. In Saskatchewan, the 1 in 500 floodplain level, I think, is unique in Canada. I don't think there's another province that has anything like it. Certainly Manitoba, I believe, is 1 in 200. Calgary, I think, is still, or Alberta is still 1 in 100, even though the downtown of Calgary was flooded. With the advent of the new private insurance for floods, there will be less concerns with PDAP and the province for compensation for people in flood areas. They'll be able to get flood insurance. I guess my question is, number one, let the private insurance deal with flood and flood control areas, but from the perspective of the province, please give it consideration to changing that 1 in 500 floodplain level to something that is realistic for the province of Saskatchewan.
Warren Keating.
Yes, I understand with the Corman Park there's some unique situations there, and from what I understand there is a study that's actually going to be undertaken with the RM McCormick Park, and that there's going to be a fair bit of work done in that area. And yes, PDAP, we'll cover that question as well. PDAP now, as we're getting into some of our large issues, certainly with wildfires and with inland flooding, we're finding a lot of private insurers now are willing to cover a lot of that. So we're certainly, again, a great opportunity to remind our stakeholders here in the room to make sure that you're covering you're looking at your insurance premiums to make sure that if you have the ability to take on flood insurance, that if you have that available to you, that you would not get that under PDAP. So just make sure that you talk to your insurance suppliers and see what you have available to you. And as well for wildfire. Certainly that was something that came up very much to us last fall. And we need to ensure that you are looking at your insurance policies and your insurance suppliers, that if they're providing that insurance coverage to you, make sure if you're concerned about it that you get that, because PDAP will not be covering that into the future if it is something that private suppliers are going to be carrying in the future.
Okay, thank you. Microphone number 3. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, my name's Howard Arndt. I'm the arm of, I'm the reeve for the arm of McKillop number 220. This statement or question is actually quite complex, so I'm going to try to make it as simple as I can. We're concerned, and I think there are a number of other municipalities around here that are close to large urban areas or resort areas, about the urbanization of rural municipalities. In our municipality, we have an actual population by Statistics Canada of 725. Of that, 450 are on the rural, in the rural area, and 250 or so are on the resort side. However, our total ratepayer complements about 1,800, and most of that is from the ratepayers that have seasonal homes. I won't call them cottages anymore. You know, some very lovely homes along the lake. Currently, there's a small group that has presented a petition to us to force a referendum in the upcoming election to ask the government to rearrange the boundaries based on ratepayers rather than, like our divisional boundaries, based on ratepayers rather than population from Statistics Canada, which has been the case for right across Canada forever. If they do that and they are successful and the province goes along with it, what it means is essentially that that rural municipality becomes an urban municipality for the purposes of governance. My question is, what is the province's position on the urbanization of rural municipalities?
I believe you have the ability within each RM to designate how you're going to put your zones or your councils out there, and you can base it on geographic, you can base it on population, you can base it on residential. So you have that ability within each RM to be able to determine that.
I'm sorry, that's correct, but it's not, because this is a resolution of a referendum which will come to the government for you to make that decision.
I believe that's an opportunity for us to consult and make sure that we try and look after all our stakeholders here. So I would say let's have that discussion.
Warren, are you around for a couple minutes right
yes,
after this?
I am.
Would you come up at the end of the bear pit and talk to Warren at the end of the bear pit?
Okay, thank you. Microphone number 1. Go ahead.
Arlen Kurtz, 183. Congratulations, Premier Moe, on your election as Premier. You did touch on rural safety, but I didn't hear a whole lot that says how we're going to address that. Premier, we need trespassing laws changed in this province. If I want to enter somebody's property, I should go down the driveway, I should go to the door and state why I'm there and what I need. Not only is that for personal safety, but we also need a trespassing law that covers safety in our land. With clubroot being the issue it is, we should have people asking permission to enter our land, because if clubroot spreads across this province, we will have an economic disaster in our agricultural economy as well. What I am suggesting that we change the trespassing law so that you enter private property for the yard, you must come to the house, state your reason for being there and what you need. If you want to enter personal private farmland, you need to have permission to go there. If we have that kind of a law in place, as I believe some of our neighbors do, maybe we can put some teeth into it and charge people for trespassing and being where they're not supposed to be. Thank you.
With respect to the trespassing laws, I'm not going to change it here today, right now. but I'm open to having the discussion with municipalities, but there would be other people that would come to that discussion later, not committing to changing them or not changing them at all today. But this is a discussion that I've heard with the 17 municipalities, our rural municipalities that I represent as an MLA and have represented since 2011. In fact, I think there was a motion that came from one of our regional SARM meetings a number of years ago with respect to that. I can allow the Minister of Justice to touch on that shortly in a moment. But with respect to rural crime and where we go over the next number of months and years here in the province of Saskatchewan, and not just rural crime, but crime in general, is we do need to have this conversation and continue to have this conversation on how our police enforcement looks as we move forward. Is there some regionalization of that? Is there some additions, some targeted additions to that as we move forward, understanding that is investment by generally the provincial government or cost shared with the federal government and municipalities. But we also need to have the conversation as we move forward with respect to some of the root causes of crime and some of the root causes of some of the challenges that we have in our communities, whether that be addictions, whether that be addictions to drugs or alcohol and access to those products, whether it be as deep as mental health causing some of those addictions. And so as the conversations that we're having as your government, and we'll be having with you in this room and others across the province in the days ahead and weeks and months ahead, will be just around that, is how do we approach this from a number of different avenues, if you will, and enforcement being one of those avenues, together to ensure that we can ensure that your home and your community and my home and my community remain safe into the future. Don, do you have any other comments on that? Or?
A little bit. When we formed government, we heard from people that they wanted to have a trespass law because, quite rightly, the RCMP had real difficulty in dealing with the criminal code as a method of dealing with property rights. To get a criminal prosecution against somebody that had entered your property was difficulty because you had to go through all of the process to prove whether they knew, didn't know. So we created the Trespass Act, which allowed for a person to get a ticket for going on to a person's property. The issue that you're raising now is whether there should be a different onus on the property owner. It used to be with the law, the expectation was that you as the landowner would post a sign or do something that was a positive act on your part. And I think what you're contemplating now is whether there should be a presumption that you can't go on somebody's property without getting permission from them first. And I think that's a healthy discussion for us to have. The issue that you talk about, club route that can be brought in by somebody that's a trespasser, or whether it's a hunter, a snowmobiler, or somebody that's there for some other purpose, is a discussion that we can and should have by way of some meaningful consultation to decide what the expectations of property owners are, and whether it's somebody that's out a hiker, a berry picker, whatever else, and where we want to go with public property. So we'd welcome having that discussion. We certainly don't want to make any kind of an assumption where that might go, but we certainly need to hear from you on it. So I'm glad you raised it.
I would just ask Dustin Duncan, because he's getting rusty and cool here, to add a few comments with respect to a little bit of the other side of the conversation, but it is open to the fact that as we evolve as a community, as in a society, these are precisely the discussions that we should have. But Dustin?
Yeah, thank you, Premier. So with respect to hunters gaining access to land for hunting purposes, certainly this has been something that we've heard from both sides of the issue. It's something that gets discussed quite a bit at our Wildlife Advisory Committee, which actually SARM has representation on that committee. So we've sent surveys out to landowners and hunters on this specific issue around written permission. That's something that has come to the advisory committee in the past. They've certainly identified some challenges with going in this direction. I won't get through all of those. I think we can all probably understand what some of those challenges would be, but I would just say that we've gone out and are consulting on this specific issue, and that'll help to inform some discussions around our advisory committee going forward into the future.
Okay, thank you. Microphone number 4.
My name is Kelly Ray. I have permission of council to address from the rural municipality of Clayton.
Sorry, are you the administrator?
I'm the administrator.
Okay, go ahead, ma'am.
Our concerns are with the bridge criteria and MREP. Unfortunately, when we were approved for MREP funding along with one of our neighbors, we were given the bridge standards, and it is one bridge, a CL 750. I can go into a lot of other stuff, but this bridge is above our needs. We do not need this bridge. 3, I have been in contact with 3 engineer constructions. My neighbors have been in contact with many more. We've been told that the bridge that suits our needs is about $500,000. What we're searching for and hoping to get is a policy change that puts more than one option for MREP. Not every bridge in Saskatchewan needs to be a CL 750. So what we would like to see is the Ministry of Highways open it up, have 3 or 4 choices so that you can access MREP money, build the bridge that is safe and to the standards and to your needs, and have more bridges built per year. Instead of this year, only 2 will be built under this criteria.
Thank you. Dave Merritt.
Thank you, Kelly, for the question. And this was also raised yesterday in the dialogue with the minister on the criteria around bridges and what we do. And I think we have to. And I know I've had a very brief discussion with the SARM executive on the criteria around MREP, as I did at the SUMA convention, talking about the Urban Highway Connector program as well. I think it's time that we have a discussion about, or a look at the criteria around it. We haven't looked at it since the program was implemented, and I'm going to actually ask SARM to engage with us, and we're going to look at the MREP criteria and see what we can do if there's some changes that we have to make. But definitely one around bridges is one that I'm very interested in changing and looking at some alternatives to that, because the cost of bridges is, especially for rural municipalities, is quite onerous upon the municipality.
Okay, thank you. Mike number 2, go ahead.
Yeah, hello, it's Wade Keeler, RM191. I've heard a lot of talk up here about economy, technology. We have come a long way together in technology. But psychology, I'm not so sure we've done so good, if we want to be honest about it. There's so many human problems out there. There's all kinds of problems, not just infrastructure problems, which are very important as well. Economy's way up there. But that's why I sort of have what I call a real-life formula that sometimes isn't addressed. I did hear Minister Moe mention mental health, and that was good. I hope he keeps continuing to mention that. But a truly educated, healthy, and happy families is what really and truly creates a healthy and strong economy. That's what does it. Not grain, not this. I mean, that's part of it, but it still takes the people. And people need hope, especially the younger generation. And if you're a forward-thinking government, I'm hoping you are, lots riding on it, hope is what this country needs. Seniors, children needs hope, and the people in between. But I will say that 7.6 mil that you reinstated to education, I'll give you a thumbs up on that. That was a great idea. If you want 2 thumbs up, put some more and make sure it goes into actually building a health education program.
You'll have to state, you have a question, you'll have to state your question. You're running out of time.
This is my question. That's the question before them. Are they going to address that need?
Thank you.
I will maybe just make a quick comment, and then I'm going to go down the line here. We'll be very quick with a couple of comments from our Minister of Education, Advanced Education, and end with the Minister of Health on some of what we're doing with mental health. But you're exactly right. Everything I talked about in increasing our exports, increasing what I view as our source wealth in this province, increasing the value of those exports. It creates jobs in our communities across this province and creates the opportunity for people to move here and the opportunity for our next generation to choose a career here in Saskatchewan. None of that happens without educated, healthy, and happy families, which is a term that I am going to remember. So you are exactly correct. We're very proud of the investment that we've had in each of these files as we're going to hear. But there's so much more to do, and I think Minister Ryder will talk a little bit about that at the end. So, Deputy Premier Gord Wyatt.
Well, thanks very much, Premier. That was well said. Really, this is all about making sure that we work to start reducing the silos between our human services ministries so that we can direct the resources where they need to go. And we've been doing a lot of work on that over the last couple of years. We're going to start thinking about how we're going to operationalize that so that we can break down these silos and start providing the services that are really needed. I can't agree more with the comments that were made by the Speaker. This is very, very important as to how we move forward, because creating healthy families, making sure that we're providing the services that we need to provide to people is critically important. Mental health, education, social services, they all need to work together to make sure that we're providing the appropriate resources to the individuals that need them.
Tina Beaudry-Miller, Minister of Advanced Education.
A couple of things on this, and thank you very much for the question. One of my portfolios is also innovation, and so just this week, in fact, researchers at the University of Regina were given an award to develop an app, a culturally appropriate app for addictions treatment to be delivered through an app that you can add on your phone. As we traveled around the province earlier this year on the leadership campaign, we heard a lot about this, and it's not just a problem for our northern communities, but it is a problem for a lot of our rural communities where the stigma attached to mental health makes it difficult for an individual to go into a clinic in their hometown. And so an online app might be a way for us to get at this. And so I think I'm very encouraged by the move towards some innovative ways for us to deliver service in a way that's accessible to people really right through their telephone. And I'm extraordinarily pleased that there's a view lens on this that is culturally also appropriate.
Jim?
On the mental health side, mental health and addictions is very front of mind for, I think, everyone in the country right now. At the recent Federal, Provincial, Territorial Health Ministers Conference that Greg and I attended, it was a significant topic of discussion. You can't have physical health if you don't have mental health. We've increased spending on mental health and addictions by 44% since we were given the privilege of forming government. There's a number of projects going on around the province, most notably, I guess, the Saskatchewan Hospital at North Battleford. There's going to be a mental health unit opening in Saskatoon as part of the new Jimmy Pattison Children's Hospital. There's a number of projects like that we're doing. We've reached a bilateral agreement with the federal government. So over the next 10 years, there'll be $158 million targeted to mental health. We're going to use every penny of that money, and we're also going to continue moving towards a target of 7% of all healthcare spending for mental health. Both the Premier and Deputy Premier committed to that during the recent leadership race. I would just also point out, as we've increased overall spending in health dramatically in the last 10 years, that increases that 7% target as well. So mental health is definitely a priority for our government.
I'm going to ask Ken Cheveldayoff to weigh in here, as well as a lot of the talk about investment in education and advanced education in our next generation, and investment in mental health and healthcare in general. All has to come within, what I had talked about earlier in the confines of balancing your budget, our budget here in the province of Saskatchewan, so that we can sustainably invest out into the future. So ultimately, as we invest in these portfolios that you expect your provincial government to invest in, we are always looking at methods that we can operate more efficiently. And are there other areas where maybe government has expanded its footprint where we shouldn't be from time to time? And I think we've asked all ministers to be aware of that as we move forward about expanding our footprint. Are there areas where we can contract it a bit, where the private sector or communities don't need the provincial government involved? And Ken has done some work specific to that, of some of the operations of government that he would maybe speak to on the other side, that ensures that the investment dollars we're talking about are real, because we're making some of the challenging decisions in other areas where we need to.
Thanks very much, Premier. And I think it's fair to say that
You know, a theme at SARM over the years is a challenge to your government to keep government as small as possible, to keep it as efficient as possible. And I just want to touch on a few areas that we've been working diligently on. You know, the government aircraft were sold off. You know, each of us as ministers have been challenged to get out there and meet as many people as possible, but to do it in our own vehicles, and that's something that certainly is working very well. And the cost of that operation has resulted in millions of dollars of savings. When we talk about vehicles, the CVAs, the Central Vehicle Agency, it's something that you know, has troubled me ever since I was elected as a member of the legislature. To deal with that, we've entered into an agreement with a private sector company, a rental car company, where we're able to use the cars when they are needed and only when they are needed, and we are able to sell off a lot of that fleet, and again, resulting in millions of dollars of savings. We entered into an ambitious agreements with cleaning companies in the province to ensure that there's a private sector lens on custodial operations in the province, and you know, it hasn't been without its challenges, but it's saved $3.5 million, and 49 of the people that were government workers are now working in the private sector or are owners of their corporations as well. As we move forward, we're going to keep on this program to make sure that we use technology and to ensure that government is as small as possible. There are 660 government buildings across Saskatchewan, and that's something I learned when I became minister. I think that's too many. I'm asking you, if you see a government building in your community that you think can be better run by the private sector, let us know, and we're certainly open to doing that. All that to say that there are ways to be more efficient, to use technology, to reduce the footprint of government so we have more money for healthcare, education, social services, and the priorities that you're bringing forward here today.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Microphone number 3, go ahead, John.
John Wagner, the Arma Piapot. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Premier Moe and Minister Duncan and our MLA Doug Steele. We've been working on this incinerator project. Hit a bit of an obstacle. We'd done our testing. We thought it had passed. We found out that we were testing against an older standard. Dioxins and furans used to be 500 PG. Now it's down to 80. We're very close. We have to do a third test. This time around, it's a little different because now all of a sudden the Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment's working with us, and that's really nice. As I speak, the stack testing specialist for the environment of ministry here is speaking with Derek Stevens, the stack testing specialist down in Albany, Georgia. So they're working out a protocol on this test. The test, when we get it back, we're hoping is literally bulletproof, that nobody can challenge this thing. The protocol we're looking at right now is 28 pages long. So we're hoping this thing is going to come through. We're really, really close. Like the 80, you know, compared to the 500, our first, we do 3 burns every time we do this. The first burn was 69, the second was 82. The third one, unfortunately, was 129 because they ran out of garbage and they went to the local church and emptied the dumpsters, and it was all styrofoam plates and plastic. So we did a 4 cubic yard burn of plastic and came in at 129. But this time around, the city of Albany is actually going to unload the garbage truck right where we're doing the testing. So it will be random household garbage. So once we have that test, we'll hopefully bring up 3 of these units fit on a semi. We'll hopefully bring 3 of them up into the province and start doing further work here. So thank you.
Dustin would have a couple comments. We waited 3 long years to talk about smokestack testing at the SARM convention, and Dustin would be happy to do it.
There you go, Thank you, Premier, and thank you, John, for your statement, but more importantly for the work that you and your group are doing down in the Southwest. And I just want to say that I hope that this is an indication and a sign, and that all RMs can see that, you know, despite the challenges that we may have from time to time on certain issues with the ministry, that we want to work in collaboration. The ministry wants to work earnestly with municipalities to find solutions that work for Saskatchewan. And so I would just say, you know, let's use this as an opportunity to hopefully find a solution solution for some of the waste issues in the province, but also use this as an example of the collaborative relationship that we can have between our Ministry of Environment and municipalities across the province. So thanks for your comment, John.
Okay, thank you. Mike number 4, and then going back to Mike number 2.
Hi, my name is Leslie Clark. I'm a counselor with the Arma Parkdale, and my question is for Don Morgan. Your actual numbers of positions are far different than bodies working. Your numbers include members of detachments that are on maternity leave, sick leave, training leave, etc. So detachments are left sometimes with far less bodies working. And I'm hoping in the future that your numbers will reflect actual bodies rather than positions. Thank you.
Curtis Zablocki from the RCMP is here today, and I think wants to be aware of some of the issues like that you raised. But it's something that we've heard, and we're doing a review of what the services we're getting. We've got a great relationship with the RCMP that goes back to the beginning of the province, but the issue with gaps and leaves that have taken place are something that's certainly problematic for us and certainly problematic for the municipalities. When you talk to the police officers, the RCMP, they say it's not so much a matter of funding, it's a matter of recruitment and able to do staffing up. So we want to be able to work with them to try and get that. But the issue that you raise, A, is valid, and B, it's something that we're working on.
I would maybe just add to that with respect to, and I just spoke to Curtis before I came in here as well, and something that I've seen occurring across the province is some of the engagement that I see at our local detachment levels with some of the town hall meetings that they're having, and I commend Curtis and I commend the RCMP for having those, because we do have some challenges across the province in the area of the Arma Parkdale, which isn't too far from the area where I live, and I hear about them firsthand from friends and people that I represent. And I would commend the RCMP for having these meetings, and I would encourage you in this room and encourage through you members in your community to attend those meetings and have that dialogue with the RCMP in a non-confrontational way, but have that good dialogue with the RCMP so they understand specifically what those challenges are. And ultimately, if we are going to solve any solution from garbage to crime to whatever that may be, we need to ensure that we work together, have the conversation about what we need to do as we move forward to improve the situation, and then put those initiatives into action. So I thank Curtis and the RCMP for the effort that they're making. I think it's an initial effort of many.
Okay, thank you. Mike 2, go ahead.
Hi, Raylene Packett from the RMA Web. I'm the administrator, and I have council's approval to address the Minister of Health, Jim Ryder. Canadian Lyme's disease test is very unreliable. The only approved Lyme disease doctor in Western Canada, recognized by our healthcare system, is Dr. Hawkins in Calgary. He uses a German lab called Armin to run his Lyme test. In August 2017, he had a 2-year waiting list. In order for treatment to be effective, it must be done immediately. Our municipality has a very ill Lyme disease patient who is paid privately to have the Armin test done because she couldn't wait the 2 years. Why are the people who help themselves not recognized by Canada Health as having Lyme disease treated? And when will the Lyme disease be recognized by our medical system?
Thanks for the question, Raylene. I think there's a number of points there. First of all, Lyme disease is recognized. I think where the dispute tends to be is your point right at the start. It's on testing. There's disagreement on whether conventional testing today is adequate or not. I think the answer, frankly, first of all, you don't want politicians making that decision, right? You want medical experts making that decision. The federal government last year announced $4 million for a study to be done on that, and I think testing, diagnosis is going to be a key part of that. So certainly we're going to cooperate completely with those tests. I believe that the first intake, or probably the only intake, was done just over the last week or two. I think the project's going to be off and running, I believe, on June the 1st. So we're going to put a lot of stock in how that turns out. In the meantime, though, the patient you're referring to, if you'd like to get a hold of my office or stick around after, I've got a few staff
here.
The
patient is me. Sorry to interrupt, but the main question is, if I pay for a private Armin test that comes back positive, which I got the requisition from Dr. Hawkins' office, in the system, I still don't have Lyme disease, so I'm paying for it privately. And if I have to go to the hospital, I have issues going on and they don't understand what's going on because I don't have Lyme.
Right. So you're the patient, you said?
Yes, I
Then
am.
could you stick around? I'd be happy to meet with you right after the bear pit.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take, we're going to try and fit in all the questions here. We're pretty much out of time, but the Premier's indicated that we're going to try and finish the question, but you have to be a little bit quicker and get to your questions. Okay, I will go back to, nobody at 3, so I will go back to 4.
Hi. Hi, Tim McKay, RM588 Reeve. My question is, our current seniors healthcare facility, we have weight restrictions on the floor and parts of it. So you can't go in areas of that facility if you are a little bit heavier. We have on the books with the government since 2008 to rebuild a new facility. And I'm sure other people here do too. What I'm wondering is, when is it going to be done? Because I'm sure the price has probably doubled in the last 10 years. And I'm sure everyone here would also be interested in how the healthcare facilities for the seniors are going throughout the province. As many people in here, I think, in the next 30 years are going to be in one.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I missed the community. Can I get the community?
Meadow Lake.
Oh, okay. Certainly, since we formed government, there's been 13 long-term care facilities that we've funded and built around the province. Meadow Lake, I'll check and we can get back to you if you can stick around, talk to one of the staff. We'll get some contact information. I know some planning work's been done there. I don't have an actual date for you yet. Certainly, there's always financial restraints when we're deciding on capital projects, but we certainly recognize the need in Meadow Lake, and we're committed to moving on that.
Okay, thank you. Mike, number 2.
Cody Georgeson, RM of Lumsden. Ministers of Essential Services and Health. Will you continue to expand the use and scope of practice of advanced care paramedics in rural hospitals and clinics to provide emergency services to rural residents where a doctor is not available or warranted? Advanced care paramedics are able to provide urgent life-saving care and in many cases are higher trained than doctors in advanced care life support. They are trained in giving antibiotics and suturing, for example. Programs such as Seniors House Calls are already underway in the city of Regina and are extremely effective. Can we expand this program into the rural setting?
I'm going to make a quick comment and then Greg's going to add to it. But first, I would just like to very quickly share a story with you. When I was the Minister of Highways a number of years ago at the SARM convention, about the first 7 or 8 questions were all highways questions. And I flippantly said, thank you for the question, and I'd like to point out the Minister of Health is here as well. Everyone laughed, and then the next half dozen questions were health questions, and I think karma is paying me back for that right now. To your point on scope of practice, Greg's going to talk about this. He's been doing some work on it, but I would just like to point out that what we've been doing, not just the paramedics, but in many of the medical professions, pharmacists, for example, we've increased scope of practice there. Nurses we have. We're trying to make the most efficient use of tax dollars and have the right medical professional at the right time providing the service. Specific to paramedics, I'll get Greg to make comments now.
We've actually been doing a lot of work when it comes around the paramedic issue. In fact, if anybody is familiar with the panel report on health system restructuring, when the panel was out doing some of the consultation, I specifically asked them to talk to not just a couple providers, but to SEMSA and get a real wide view of what's happening with EMS in the province and the direction we needed to go. And even before the panel report, had been very engaged with Kyle Serrata and then Steve Skrodko from WACA and SEMSA over the years before to try and find out some of the issues they were having. And I was really, I guess, pleased when I saw the panel report and how much attention was given to EMS and how much recognition they were giving, but also the panel reports, if you actually look at it, one of the top priorities in the short term is EMS and restructuring EMS. Firstly, around what we have to do first is around the contracting of the EMS providers in the province. That work is almost complete, and that'll be rolling out very soon. And then working with them a lot of different areas when it comes to maybe nearest car to respond, GPS tracking, AVL, mapping, all the rest of it. I've been working with Warren on the mapping side of things. The 911 is more or less through GR. But working on a lot of those different things to get the EMS system in itself more comprehensive and more responsive to specifically our rural areas. A lot of that does come around having the right people in the right place, and then recruitment and retention of some of these professionals and some of these small communities. And a lot of that does center around primary care paramedics, advanced care paramedics, and utilizing them more fully in some of these areas. Even outside of the major center that you talked about, I think about Wynyard, where I think it was in Wynyard, where there was a patient looking for palliative care, and how EMS, home care, nursing, and the whole team was ended up being, so to speak, wrapped around that patient. So he was able to live out his days with really great care in his home, and that was using paramedics. I talked about CECs earlier, how we've utilized paramedics and nursing with doctor oversight to deliver some of that emergent services in these communities as well, and that's kind of where we started. But a lot of the work we're going to be continuing to do from now on is utilizing paramedics in a more fulsome way throughout the whole medical field to help with home care, even the clinical support, as well as paramedic services. And one thing that was pointed out to me, actually one of my workers in my office is a primary care paramedic, and a new one in my office is a primary care paramedic. So I've gotten a lot of first-hand information from them, as well as from SEMSA and from some of the union people that do represent paramedics in the province. And some things that they pointed out to us when it comes to some of these hard-to-recruit positions, it's because there might be a 0.5 position it's hard to recruit for. But if we can utilize some of these other opportunities to make that a permanent or a more fulsome job with paramedicine and with the actual paramedic, and maybe utilize it for maybe home care and some clinical support, it ends up being a really a very substantial job where we're more apt to be able to recruit some of these people too as well. I'm not sure if Tina wants to talk about the ACP training, but I do know that there was a little bit of a risk with the ACP training being minimized, and we've expanded that as well.
She would like to talk, but you've used up her time.
Used up her time.
I'm passionate,
Well
Scott.
said.
I'm passionate.
Well said. Thank you very much for the answer. The last question, Mike 4.
Terry Cernick, RM Coalfields, number 4. This is for Minister Duncan in regards to being the Minister of SAS-Power. Down in the southeast, the coal industry is huge with RRM and the neighboring RM. My question is the future of the coal down there, we're so unsure. We haven't heard what's going on. The UMWA, which is the workers in the coal mine, have requested to have a meeting with SAS-Power, only to be told, no, that's not going to happen. My question is can we meet afterwards and maybe get some information, and you maybe give me some direction, and I can give you some numbers to contact the representatives down there?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'll just say, though, as a former Minister of Health, I really appreciate the delegates' interest in the healthcare questions. Yeah, I would absolutely stick around. I'd be happy to meet with you afterwards and coordinate a meeting. It's my plan in the short coming weeks to get down to Estevan and not only tour the plants down there, but meet with some of the employees. This certainly is a very important issue for, I think, frankly, the province, but specifically people in Estevan and Coronach, which I had the pleasure of representing for 10 years. So, we have decisions that we have to make, not only on Boundary Dam 4 and 5. We know that BD3 has been a vital part of our climate change plan here in the province. As the Premier indicated, we're 2 million tons sequestered. And, maybe just add to what the Premier indicated of why what Saskatchewan is doing is so important. Keep in mind that Alberta and British Columbia, which have carbon taxes, will export 35 million tons of coal this year to places like China, India, etc., that will use it to either build pipeline or to run coal-fired electrical generation stations. So what we're doing here in terms of technology is so important. But I'll be here at the table if you want to meet with me afterwards. Thanks.
I just say on that, the impact that I spoke about with carbon capture and storage and some of what we're having, I spoke about the impact that it can have globally, but you're precisely right, is it can also have an impact in places right here at home like Coronach and Estevan.
Okay, with that, that wraps up our Bear Pit session. On behalf of SARM and all the delegates here today, I'd like to thank the Premier for coming and for all the cabinet ministers today. Thank you very much.
I as well, I would just like to say a quick thank you to all of you here, all the SARM delegates that attend and ask these questions. We talk about the topics of questions that come to us, and they've changed a little bit this year that I've noticed. They've changed away from the Environment Minister to the Health Minister. And you don't think for a minute that we aren't taking note of the theme of those questions, and we will have those topics of discussion amongst our caucus and our cabinet as we move forward. So I thank you so much for your engagement and being here. I also want to take this opportunity to thank all of our caucus members that you elect and our cabinet members that are up here today for not only being here today and knowing their files as well as they do, but all of our caucus members as well for what they add. And I will apologize in advance to TJ, who I think is serving next, but I firmly believe that we have the strongest caucus and the strongest cabinet, including our federal parties, of anywhere in the nation of Canada, and I'm so very proud of them, and I thank them for being here today to intermingle with you.
Thank you.